The colony world was quiet under the dim light of its red sun, and the air carried the sound of insects hidden within the alien forest, and though the place was filled with strange dangers, the settlers had grown used to its rhythm, as if the world itself had become their uneasy neighbor. At the edge of the settlement a young child walked with small steps. The child was curious about everything beyond the fences and the machines that hummed inside the colony walls, and though the parents often warned the child never to stray too far, the forest was a lure stronger than fear itself. The tree stood tall with bark like iron and leaves that shimmered with faint blue fire when the wind passed, and shadows moved between those trees, carrying eyes that watched silently from above and below, and every sound of snapping twig made the air colder, as if something waited for the right moment. The child followed a path that had once been cleared by workers, but now the wild had grown back, and vines wrapped across the ground, and when the child knelt to touch a glowing flower, the shadow of something vast covered the ground before them. The predator moved without sound, yet its presence filled the forest like a wave of dark tide, and its body was long and low with muscles rippling under plates of black hide, and its head carried jaws wide enough to break stone and eyes that burned like pale green fire as it fixed on the child. The child froze, unable to breathe, unable to scream, and the predator lowered itself step by step as if tasting the fear that rolled from its prey, and each step pressed the ground deeper until the soil cracked under its weight, and the sound of its claws dragging across the earth was like knives. In the colony walls alarms had not yet rung, and no guard had seen what was happening, for the child had wandered just out of sight, and the predator was already close enough to reach with a single strike, and the forest itself seemed to hold its breath, waiting for the first cry. The predator tilted its head and opened its jaws slow as thunder, and strings of silver saliva dripped from its teeth, and the green light of its eyes reflected on the child's face. And though the beast towered over its prey, it did not attack immediately, for predators enjoyed the moment when fear was pure. The child tried to step back, but the vines held the small boots, and every pull made the vines tighten, and the predator lowered its head closer and closer, until the child could see scars along its jaw, marks of many battles won against creatures far larger than humans, and still it lived without rival. As the predator reached forward with one heavy claw, the ground shook like a small quake, and dust rose in the air, and the child shut their eyes with a tiny sob, hoping for safety, yet knowing none would come, and in that instant the forest answered with a new sound. From beneath a broken log came a shape much smaller than the predator and much smaller than the humans themselves, yet filled with fury that did not belong to its size, and the honey badger lunged from the shadows with a snarl like tearing metal, its teeth flashing white, and its claws curved like hooks. The predator halted in surprise, for never had prey leapt toward it with such madness, and the badger slammed into its leg, biting deep into the thick hide until blood sprayed across the leaves, and the predator let out a roar that shook the air and startled the birds into the sky. The child fell backward, pulling free from the vines as the predator thrashed against the small attacker, but the badger did not let go, its body twisting and tearing deeper with each second, and every roar from the predator became louder, but every roar carried more pain and more panic than before. The forest lit with movement as smaller creatures fled from the noise, and the predator shook its leg, slamming the badger against the ground, yet the badger only bit harder, climbing higher with each strike, until it reached the softer flesh near the neck and ripped without hesitation. The predator tried to crush it with claws, but the badger slipped under every strike, its rage too wild to predict, and its body too stubborn to yield, and the child crawled toward the colony fence screaming for help, though the sound was swallowed by the battle of beast against fury. The predator finally broke free with one violent shake, throwing the honey badger against a tree trunk, yet even bleeding, and battered. The small creature rose again, teeth bared, and eyes filled with fire, ready to charge once more, and for the first time the predator hesitated and took a step back. Blood dripped from its wounds, painting the ground, and the predator growled low, but its eyes showed something never seen before, fear, and with a final roar it turned and vanished into the forest, leaving behind broken branches and torn soil as the honey badger limped forward, still snarling at the empty shadows. The child stared with wide eyes, tears running down their face, and though the badger was bruised and bleeding, it stood beside the child, like a sentinel refusing to retreat, until the danger was gone and the forest fell silent again, carrying only the smell of blood and the sound of ragged breath. Within moments colonists rushed through the gates, weapons raised, But they stopped in disbelief at the sight of the predator's blood on the ground, and the small animal standing guard over the child, and whispers began at once, for never had such a small thing forced back such a terror. The child clung to the honey badger as if holding a shield made of pure courage, and though the battle was over, the story had just begun, for the predator had tasted something new that day, and the galaxy itself would soon hear of the fury that no power could tame. The colony did not sleep that night, for the roar of the predator and the echo of the honey badger's defiance spread like fire among the people, and every settler told the story again and again, adding more weight and more fear with each retelling. And though the child had been saved, no one forgot how close death had come, and no one forgot what force had stood between life and loss. The honey badger rested near the settlement wall, licking the blood from its fur, and though its body carried deep cuts, its eyes glowed with the same wild fire as when it first charged, and the colonists whispered that it was no ordinary creature, but something forged from steel and fury, something that carried the heart of humanity inside its small frame. The predator had fled, yet the forest carried its scent still sharp and bitter on the wind, and many feared it would return, for predators never forgot humiliation and never forgave pain, and this beast had tasted both on that day, and somewhere in the shadow of the alien trees it watched, and it remembered. The child slept under heavy blankets, safe inside the colony, yet dreams brought back the glowing green eyes and the reaching claws, and each time the child woke, they searched for the small badger, and smiled only when they saw it curled near the door, breathing steady, as if guarding them even in rest. The colony leaders met in the command hall, their faces pale under the flickering lights, and voices rose and fell as they argued about the danger, for no wall was high enough to stop the predator if it returned with full strength, and no weapon was quick enough to save a wandering child. And yet one voice reminded them all that the small beast had done what no tool of steel had done. It had turned fear into retreat. That voice belonged to an old soldier who had fought in the outer wars, and he spoke of how morale shaped destiny more than guns, and how a symbol could bend armies. And he said that perhaps the honey badger was more than a pet, perhaps it was a reminder that humans never bowed, no matter the size of the foe. The settlers marked the ground where the predator had bled with a sign of warning, and some left small offerings of food and cloth near the badger, as if it were a spirit guardian sent to them, and though the creature did not understand the meaning, it accepted the food with sharp teeth and a growl that sounded like victory. The predator meanwhile dragged itself through the deep forest, its hide torn, its flesh aching, its pride shattered, and as it licked its wounds it remembered the taste of pain, the feel of teeth in its flesh, the burning eyes of that tiny attacker, and rage grew inside its chest like a storm ready to break mountains. For days the predator did not hunt, it only waited and healed, and gathered others of its kind, for predators of that species hunted alone, but when shamed they could gather as a pack driven by the need to reclaim power, and soon the forest carried more shadows and more green eyes moving through the night like fireflies of death. The honey badger sensed this change before the colonists did. Its nose lifted toward the dark horizon, its body tense, its growl constant, as if it could hear steps no human could hear, and when the colonists tried to calm it, the animal only dug claws into the soil, as if preparing for a storm. The colony built extra barriers and stationed guards along the walls, yet fear remained, for they had seen what one predator could do, and the thought of many was enough to chill even the bravest heart, and whispers spread that perhaps they should leave this world before more blood was shed. The child, however, did not fear as much as the adults, for they believed the badger would never allow harm to touch them, and in their young eyes the beast was more powerful than any monster and more loyal than any soldier, and when they sat beside it they spoke softly, as if sharing secrets of courage. When the night came, the forest moved like a sea of shadows, and the cries of beasts echoed across the hills, and the colonists woke to the sound of alarms. At last the predators had returned, and not one, but many, their glowing eyes surrounding the settlement, their bodies pressing forward, as if hunger and vengeance had made them one single storm of teeth. The colonists lifted their rifles, and their heavy cannons hummed, but even as weapons fired, the predators leapt through the air, breaking lines and tearing metal, and one strike of a claw split a turret like paper, and the walls began to shake under the endless waves. The honey badger leapt from the ground like lightning, its small body crashing into the nearest predator, and its teeth sank deep into a throat before the beast even landed, and though the predator thrashed, the badger only ripped deeper and rolled away before another claw could strike, and in that moment the colonists saw the fury of something unstoppable. The pack roared together, their voices rolling like thunder, but the badger did not flee. It charged again, and again, climbing one predator's back, tearing out chunks of flesh, then turning to face another, and its growls filled the air louder than the cannons themselves, and the predators faltered for the first time, as if fear had spread among them like poison. One predator caught the badger with a heavy strike, sending it rolling across the ground, but before the colonists could cry out, the beast rose again, blood pouring from its side, its eyes brighter than fire, and it hurled itself once more into the fray, as if pain was nothing and death was a lie. The child screamed encouragement from a wall, their small voice carrying over the chaos, and the badger fought harder, as if it heard and understood, and its body became a blur of rage, claws slicing eyes, teeth breaking bones, and every predator it struck fell back limping, bleeding, fleeing into the forest once more. The pack broke after hours of battle, their pride torn apart, their leader limping with half its face shredded, and though many colonists lay injured, the walls still stood, and the child still breathed, and at the center of the blood-soaked ground stood the honey badger, swaying with exhaustion, yet still snarling at the shadows, refusing to yield even when victory was already won. The colonists lowered their weapons in silence, staring at the small creature that had saved them twice from certain destruction, and one by one they began to cheer, their voices rising until the night shook with human defiance, and the badger growled once more, as if claiming the cheers as its own. In the days that followed, stories spread faster than light, carried by traders and soldiers, and every retelling made the honey badger greater than before. Some said it was no animal, but a warrior spirit. Some said it was a weapon of earth bred in secret labs. Some said it could not die, for it carried the will of humanity itself. Aliens beyond the colony heard these tales, and at first they laughed at the absurdity, a small beast defeating monsters of such scale, but when the recordings reached them showing blood spraying, showing predators fleeing, their laughter turned to silence, and then to unease, and in their councils they whispered questions that had no answer. If humans bred such fury into their smallest animals, what then did they breed into their own soldiers? And if this was only the beginning, what storms would follow when humanity rose in full? The honey badger healed slowly, yet its spirit never dimmed, and the child never left its side. And when asked what they felt when the beast fought, the child answered in simple words, it never gave up, and neither should we. And those words spread as far as the story itself, a message to every human world. The predators never returned to that colony, for they had learned fear for the first time, and fear is the wound that never heals, and deep in the forest the broken leader remembered the small beast that would not die, and it turned away from human lands forever. Thus the unstoppable fury of the honey badger was written into the stars, and those who had seen it with their own eyes knew they had witnessed not just survival, but the birth of a legend that would soon shake the galaxy itself. The battle of the colony did not stay hidden for long, for every settler carried a recorder, and every weapon had a lens, and when the predators fled, leaving the ground torn and painted in blood, the recordings traveled faster than ships and reached every corner of human space, and beyond human space as well. Merchants carried the tale as they left the world, speaking of a beast no larger than a child that had torn monsters apart with nothing but rage and teeth and claws, and though many laughed at first thinking it was only an exaggeration, the recordings showed the truth in full light, and no voice could deny what was seen. On stations orbiting dying suns, miners gathered in crowded bars and replayed the images again and again, raising their cups to the honey badger that would not fall, and they laughed and shouted with pride, as if the small beast were one of their own comrades in battle, and they told each other that no human heart ever surrendered, no matter the size of the foe. In the halls of alien councils, the same images spread across shimmering screens, and the rulers of proud empires leaned forward to watch the fury of something so small and yet so fearless. And at first their advisors chuckled, speaking of human myths and how stories always grew larger than truth. But then they saw the predator fleeing with half its face torn, and their laughter died. An ambassador of the Trinari spoke in a whisper, saying, "If this is how their beasts fight, then how do their warriors fight?" And another voice from the Saruan added, "If they can breed such defiance into animals, what horrors wait when they release their armies?" And silence spread through the chamber as each leader thought the same thought, but none dared to speak it aloud. On the colony itself, the child walked hand in hand with the honey badger, now healed enough to move those scars, ran across its body, and every settler bowed their head slightly, When they passed for the child was no longer seen as weak and wandering, but as the one who had lived through the fury of the beast and survived because of loyalty beyond reason. The soldiers stationed on the world began to study the creature, its movements, its reactions, its refusal to retreat even when bleeding, and they wrote reports that described it as more than instinct, more than survival. They wrote of something that could not be broken by fear, and they sent these reports to Central Command, where generals read them with eyes that grew wider at each line. The story spread through trade channels, through whispers in dark markets, through messages hidden inside coded transmissions, and each retelling made the honey badger larger in legend and sharper in terror. Some told it had fought 10 predators, some said it had torn through steel walls, some even said it could smell fear itself, and hunted across miles. And though not all believed these words, enough believed to plant seeds of unease. In the academy of the Zarin Empire, young officers watched the footage, and their instructor told them to laugh. Yet no one did, for they could see the truth with their own eyes, and they felt a chill when the badger rose, after being thrown against stone, bleeding yet refusing to yield, and one cadet whispered quietly, "I would rather face 10 of our rivals than one of those beasts beside a human soldier." Human diplomats noticed this change in whispers, and they allowed the story to flow, without correction, never confirming, never denying, only smiling when asked, and this silence became a weapon sharper than any blade, for it left every alien power to imagine what might come if humanity chose to unleash not only beasts but themselves. Merchants used the image of the honey badger on banners and cups and clothing, and soon it became a mark of courage carried proudly across worlds, and children began to play games pretending to be the small beast fighting giants, without fear, and parents watched with pride, for they saw in those games a lesson of survival and defiance. The predator species that had once hunted freely in the forests of the colony now avoided human lands entirely, and when one wandered too close it turned back at the scent, as if the memory of pain still burned inside its bones, and this change was noticed by scouts and recorded as fact-proof that even great monsters could learn fear from something smaller than their own claws. On a moon near the rim, a group of alien mercenaries debated whether to accept a contract against a human outpost, and one of them said, with a shiver, "Remember the beast," and another spat on the ground, saying, "I will not fight those who keep demons as pets," and the deal collapsed in fear before it began. The child who had once been nameless in the crowd was now remembered by every settler, and they grew with a quiet strength shaped by the night of the predator's claw and the fury of the honey badger. And they spoke often of courage, telling others that size and strength mean nothing when the will to resist is stronger than fear itself, and those words spread like flame. The honey badger itself changed little, still snarling at shadows, still biting at tools, still carrying the same fire in its eyes, yet around it grew a legend far greater than its simple body could hold, and in that legend humans found a symbol that united them across distance and across doubt, and they began to call it the spirit of Earth unleashed. In distant halls alien rulers met again, their voices sharp and anxious, and one said, "If humans create warriors like this, then our fleets may not be enough," and another replied, "Perhaps it is only myth." But no one believed their own words, for the recordings did not lie, and the predators themselves now avoided humans, and that was proof enough. Soon the phrase spread across the stars, whispered in fear and respect, "Beware the honey badger, for it fights beyond reason and dies only when the galaxy itself falls." And though the words were born of legend, they carried the weight of prophecy, for those who spoke them felt in their bones that humanity was not like others, that humanity was born from the same fury. Thus whispers became warnings, and warnings became fear, and fear became power, for humanity did not need to prove their strength in endless wars. They only needed to let the galaxy wonder what else they might unleash if such fury came from something so small. And this wonder grew until it became dread. The child looked up at the night sky, often pointing to the stars, and saying, "One day they will all know." And the honey badger at their side growled softly, as if it agreed, and somewhere in those stars leaders of alien empires shivered in silence, knowing that the whisper of one small beast had already begun to shake their thrones. The forest did not forget the roar of the honey badger, nor did the predators who had once ruled its dark valleys and high cliffs, for shame is a wound deeper than any claw, and the leader of the pack carried such shame in its scarred face each time it looked into the still pools of water. It saw not victory, but the tiny beast that had forced it to flee, and each time rage grew stronger inside its chest. For days the predator healed in silence, gathering strength and calling others, with cries that echoed like thunder through the woods, and soon shadows gathered around it, green eyes shining between the black trunks, until the colony was surrounded by hunger and fury, hidden in the night, yet waiting for the moment to strike again. The colonists lived in fear, though they tried to hide it behind stronger walls and sharper weapons. They knew the predators were near, for their howls drifted across the fields every dusk and every dawn, and the honey badger growled each night, refusing to sleep, for long, its body tense and ready to leap into battle, as if it knew the enemy would not remain patient forever. The child stayed close to the creature, feeling safer in its shadow than even behind the metal gates, for they believed no beast, no matter how large, could touch them so long as the honey badger lived, and this belief spread through the settlement until every person whispered the same thought. Perhaps the badger was not just a beast, but the spirit of their survival given flesh. One night the storm came, clouds heavy and sky torn by red lightning. The colonists gathered in their shelters as the wind screamed through the wires of the fences, and in that storm the predators returned, their glowing eyes flashing with every strike of lightning, their bodies slipping from the forest like waves of living night. The alarms blared and rifles fired, but the predators moved with speed that defied sight, slamming against walls, ripping at towers, and tearing metal like cloth. The colonists fought with courage, but fear clung to them like chains, for no matter how many shots rang out, the predators kept coming, each strike shaking the ground and filling the air with screams. At the center of it all, the honey badger stood, its fur bristling, its teeth bared, its growl rising above even the storm. And when the largest predator leapt toward the wall, the small beast launched itself upward, meeting it in mid-air and sinking its teeth into the throat before both crashed to the earth below. The child cried out in terror, yet also in hope, for they saw the badger rise again, blood dripping, yet eyes blazing with fire brighter than the lightning, and with a roar the creature charged into the swarm of giants, clawing and biting as if no wound could slow it down. The predators tried to crush it with sheer weight, yet each time they struck, the badger slipped beneath their claws, tearing flesh from their bellies or ripping tendons from their legs, and though it was thrown again and again, it always rose again, its body a storm of rage that no wall could contain. The colonists watched in awe as their rifles fired slower, their hands shaking, yet their courage returned, for if something so small could fight with such fury, then how could they allow fear to rule their own hearts? And they began to fight harder, pressing back against the tide with every ounce of strength. The leader of the predators bellowed, its fury, its scarred face glowing under lightning, as it charged toward the honey badger, determined to end the shame of its last defeat once and for all. The two collided with a force that shook the soil beneath them, the predator slashing with claws longer than swords, the badger snapping with jaws that refused to let go. The battle raged between them, rolling across the field, tearing through fences and scattering soldiers, as both beast and fury refused to yield. Blood poured from the predator, yet still it fought, trying to crush the life from the smaller foe. But the honey badger only dug deeper, its eyes wild, its body driven by something no pain could break. Hours passed, though it felt like minutes, the storm never ceasing, the colonists holding the line as the pack of predators faltered, one by one falling back under fire and under fear, for though they were many, their leader could not win, and if the leader fell, so too would their courage. At last, with one final roar, the honey badger leapt onto the predator's back, tearing into its neck with all the strength left in its battered frame, and the predator staggered, clawing at its own flesh in desperate fury, before collapsing into the mud, its green eyes fading into darkness as silence swept the field. The surviving predators howled in despair, then turned and fled, vanishing into the forest, leaving behind their fallen leader and the bodies of their kin, and the colony stood in silence as the honey badger limped back toward the wall, its body torn and bleeding, yet its head held high, its growl still low and steady, as if warning the night itself never to return. The child rushed forward despite the cries of the adults and wrapped arms around the scarred beast, unafraid of the blood and the fury, and for a moment the storm seemed to quiet, as if even the sky itself bowed before the will of something too small to be called mighty, yet too fierce to be denied. The colonists gathered around, some weeping, some shouting, but all feeling the same truth, that they had witnessed not merely survival but victory against a nightmare that should have destroyed them all. And from that night onward, the honey badger was not just an animal, it was a guardian, a symbol of defiance that every settler carried in their heart. Word spread again, carried by ships and signaled by traders and by soldiers, and the tale grew sharper with each telling. Now, it was not only the story of one battle, but not only the defeat of one predator, but of a pact, not only the survival of a child, but the salvation of a colony, and each detail became a weapon in the mind of those who heard it. In distant empires, rulers listened in silence, and their advisors trembled, for if humanity could inspire such loyalty in beasts, then what storms might they unleash with their own kind? And if a small colony defended itself with a single badger, what then would a fleet of humans do when cornered by enemies with greater strength? The predators of that world never returned, for fear had entered their blood deeper than hunger, deeper than rage. They avoided the colony lands, circling wide around its borders, and in time they became stories told by human children who laughed at monsters in the dark, for they knew a greater monster lived in their defense, one whose fury was beyond measure. The honey badger healed again, though its body carried scars like medals of war, and each mark told a story of defiance and victory, and the child grew with it always at their side, and in their eyes the bond between them was more than chance, it was destiny, a reminder that courage is born not from size, but from will. Thus the predator's return became more than just another attack. It became proof that no matter how strong, no matter how many the enemies of humanity might be, there would always be something waiting to defy them, something small, something fierce, something that would never let go and never surrender. And in that truth the galaxy began to tremble. The galaxy is wide and filled with voices, some loud, some quiet, some carried by trade, and some by war, and yet few stories travel as far and as fast as those born of fear and courage, and the story of the honey badger and the colony child had now become more than a tale. It had become a warning that echoed through every channel, every starport, and every council hall. Merchants whispered it across docking bays, their ships heavy with goods, but their tongues heavier with rumor, and when they told the tale their eyes shone with excitement, for people leaned closer to hear, and always asked the same question: could it be true? Could such a small beast fight monsters so large? And the merchant smiled and said, we have seen the proof with our own eyes, and those who listened felt the chill of belief crawl through their bones. Soldiers in distant outposts watched the recordings replayed again and again across mess halls, and they slammed their fists on tables, shouting that this was the spirit of humanity, the spirit that never yielded. And younger soldiers, who had never seen real war, felt their hearts burn with pride, for they saw in the fury of the honey badger the reflection of their own potential. Alien mercenaries gathered in smoke-filled dens and watched the same images, yet their reactions were different. Their laughter faded into silence, their drinks left untouched, as they saw the predator leader fall beneath a beast smaller than their weapons, and one of them muttered, if this is what protects their children, what protects their fleets? And none had an answer. In the councils of great empires the story was spoken in careful tones, advisors presenting reports and rulers demanding clarity, and though some dismissed it as an isolated tale, most could not ignore the evidence, for the predators themselves had abandoned human lands, proof that something beyond natural balance had been broken, and when predators refuse to hunt, fear is always the reason. The Zarin Empire held a meeting in its golden chamber, and one advisor warned that humans must not be underestimated, for if they can shape loyalty and rage in their beasts, then their armies must be shaped by even greater fire. And the emperor sat in silence, his fingers tapping the arm of his throne, while his generals exchanged nervous glances. On the world of the Saruan hierarchy, scholars debated for hours. Some argued that the honey badger was simply an accident of nature, a creature bred without intent. Others claimed it was the result of human design, perhaps a weapon hidden within a pet. Yet all agreed that the symbol now born of it was more dangerous than the creature itself, for symbols do not die, they multiply. Human diplomats remained calm, never confirming, never denying. They smiled when asked and offered no detail, letting the mystery grow. And this silence was a blade sharper than truth, for the galaxy was forced to imagine answers of its own, and imagination is always more terrifying than certainty. The child who had once been nameless became a symbol. Two settlers looked at them and saw hope, for the future songs were written about the bond between child and beast, ballads sung in taverns across stations, and each note carried the message that humanity stood together with its guardians, no matter how small, no matter how unlikely. And this music spread faster than official channels ever could. The honey badger itself did not change, still snarling at tools, still stealing food from supplies, still biting at anything that came too close. Yet to the settlers, it was no longer just an animal, it was a banner of survival, and they painted its image on shields, on walls, even on the hulls of ships that left the colony, and soon travelers carried those images far beyond the system. In a mining camp on a frozen moon, workers faced a collapse deep underground, and when fear threatened to crush their spirits, one of them shouted, "Remember the honey badger," and the others found strength to keep digging until rescue arrived, and afterward they painted the small beast on the entrance wall as a reminder of defiance. Among alien navies, commanders spoke in hushed voices, warning their crews never to underestimate humans, for if a pet could shatter predators, then soldiers would surely shatter empires, and this thought spread like poison until even mighty fleets hesitated when orders came to confront human forces. A council of allied worlds once debated whether to push humans out of new colonies, yet the debate ended quickly, for one ambassador reminded the others of the honey badger and how quickly fear had spread through predators that once ruled without rival, and he asked, "Do we wish to be remembered as those predators broken by something small?" And the hall fell silent, for none wished to be shamed in the same way. The child grew stronger with each passing day, and they spoke often of what they had seen, and their words carried weight far beyond their years, for they told others that courage is not born of strength, but of spirit, and that size means nothing when the will to fight burns brighter than fear, and people listened, for those words matched what they had seen with their own eyes. The predators that had once haunted the forests no longer came near human settlements. Their numbers faded as they chose easier prey, and in time their kind moved deeper into the wild lands, leaving the colony in peace. Yet their retreat only fueled the legend, for predators do not abandon ground without reason, and the reason was known across the stars. The galaxy watched carefully, waiting for the next sign. Some rulers hoped it was only a tale that would fade with time, but others feared it was the beginning of something far greater, and they sent spies to human worlds, searching for proof. Yet those spies returned with nothing but silence, and silence made the fear worse. Merchants began selling trinkets shaped like honey badgers, small figures carved from stone or cast in metal, and these sold faster than any other good, for every traveler wanted to carry a piece of the legend as protection, and as pride, and ships painted the beast on their hulls, believing it would shield them in hostile space. One alien warlord once laughed at the story, calling it foolish, yet when he ordered an attack on a human freighter, his soldiers refused and muttered of the honey badger, their hands shaking on their weapons, and he realized too late that fear had already undone his power, for fear is the shadow that no blade can cut. The humans themselves used the legend with care, never pushing too hard, never claiming more than was true. They let others believe what they wished, and in doing so they turned the galaxy into their messenger, spreading the tale further than their own voices could reach. And so the galaxy watched with wary eyes and cautious hearts, every leader, every fleet, every trader, waiting to see what humans would do next. And though no battle was fought in those days, a greater victory had already been won, for the strongest weapon is not always a blade or a gun. It is the belief that an enemy cannot be broken, and now the galaxy believed exactly that. The child stood at the colony wall one night, staring at the stars, the honey badger at their side, its fur still scarred, its eyes still burning, and the child whispered softly, "They all know now." And the beast growled low in agreement, and far away in the halls of rulers and warlords the same thought echoed, like a warning: humanity has shown its spirit, and the galaxy is not ready for what follows. The galaxy had begun to whisper, but humanity did not rush to speak, for silence itself was more powerful than any boast, and the diplomats of Earth and its colonies understood this truth with perfect clarity. So they let the story of the honey badger move like wind across the stars, never blocking it, never correcting it, only allowing it to grow larger with every retelling. In embassies across alien capitals, human envoys smiled when asked about the beast, and they raised their glasses in quiet toasts when others pressed for answers, and the lack of detail became the sharpest answer of all, for nothing breeds fear more quickly than imagination, and the galaxy was now imagining endlessly. The honey badger remained at the colony, scarred yet alive, still filled with rage at every shadow and every noise. But to the people it was not simply an animal, it was the guardian of their children, the shield of their lives, the embodiment of the defiance that defined humanity, and they began to treat it as a living emblem, painting its image on walls, forging its likeness into armor, carving it into stone, so that wherever humans walked, the symbol walked beside them. The child who had once been weak and small now carried a strength that came from surviving the jaws of death. And when asked what they remembered most of that night, they said, in a clear voice, that the badger never gave up, not even once, and those words spread further than the story itself, for they held the essence of the human message. On distant worlds and training grounds and academies, young recruits repeated those words to each other before drills. They shouted never give up. As they marched, they carved it into the stocks of their rifles, they painted it on the sides of their helmets, and slowly the galaxy began to hear the chant echo across every human outpost, until it became inseparable from the image of the honey badger. Human leaders saw the effect, and they began to weave the tale into their speeches, not with pride, but with calm weight. They said to alien councils, if one small beast can stand against giants, then so too can the smallest of our colonies stand against empires. And the halls grew silent, for the truth was sharp enough to cut through every doubt. Merchants too began to use the image on their sails and their ships, claiming that the fury of the honey badger protected them from pirates. And when raiders saw the emblem shining on hulls, they hesitated, for the story had already reached them, and hesitation often meant retreat without a shot fired. On the colony itself, the settlers built a monument on the field where the predator leader had fallen. They raised stones in a circle and carved the likeness of the honey badger at the center, teeth bared, claws ready forever facing the forest, and at its base they wrote the words never give up in a dozen languages, so that no visitor could misunderstand the message. Alien scholars attempted to dismiss it as mere symbolism, yet even they found themselves unsettled when they studied the recordings again and again, for they could not explain why the creature rose after every blow, nor why it fought beyond the limits of instinct, and in their failure to explain they saw something they feared, something that echoed the human spirit. The predators themselves changed as well, for they no longer dared to enter the colony lands, and over time they abandoned the region, entirely leaving behind forests that grew quiet and still, and though nature abhors emptiness, the silence remained, as if the memory of fury hung in the air too heavy to cross, and this silence became its own message, a warning etched into the wilderness. The child grew into a speaker for the settlement, their voice carrying across gatherings, their presence commanding attention, not because of authority, but because of survival, and they told every crowd the same lesson, that courage is greater than strength, that will is greater than fear, and that surrender is death, while resistance is life. And people listened not with ears, but with hearts, for they knew the truth of those words. In far councils, alien leaders debated what to do. Some called for war before humans grew stronger, others whispered for alliance before it was too late, and still others said to wait and watch, but all were united in one thing: they feared the message that now wrapped itself around every human action, for it was not only a story, it was a creed. The honey badger lived on, scarred and battered but unbroken, and with each passing year its legend only deepened. It had become more than flesh, more than fur. It had become the spirit of humanity itself, distilled into one unstoppable force, and whenever new recruits joined the armies, they were shown its image and told, this is who you are, this is why you fight. In one distant battle, not of humans, but of two alien empires locked in endless war, soldiers from both sides spoke of the honey badger. In hushed tones they said, if humans ever enter our war, it will end in fire, for they fight like the beast and never stop. And fear spread even where humans were absent, proof that the message had become larger than the species itself. Humanity did not deny this power. Instead, they shaped it carefully like fire in a forge, using it to strengthen alliances, to secure peace. Where once they would have been ignored, to demand respect, where once they would have been dismissed, and every time they spoke they needed no threat, for the story of the honey badger was the threat. The child, now older, stood often at the monument with the badger at their side, still snarling at shadows, and they would tell visitors that the beast was not special, only stubborn, that it fought not because it wanted glory, but because it refused to die, and that refusal was the heart of humanity. And those who listened left with silence in their minds, for they understood the weight of that truth. And so humanity's message spread, not by fleets, not by fire, but by fury born of one small creature on one distant world, and the message was clear to every corner of the galaxy: never give up, never surrender, never bow, no matter the size of the foe, no matter the odds of survival, no matter the cost, for will is stronger than fear, and courage is stronger than death. The galaxy had seen many wars, many empires rise and fall, but none had seen such a message take root so quickly. None had seen fear turn to respect so swiftly, and in their hearts they knew that if this was only the beginning, then the future belonged to humanity, and nothing could stop it. One night the child, now nearly grown, stood once again at the colony wall, the honey badger beside them, both scarred, both silent, staring at the stars, and the child whispered, "They are listening now," and the beast growled low, as if it too knew the truth, and in the farthest reaches of the galaxy alien rulers shivered, for they had heard the message as well, and they knew it could not be silenced. The years passed, yet the story did not fade, for legends have roots deeper than stone, and wings wider than the void, and the tale of the honey badger that defied predators spread until it was no longer a single memory, but a shared truth woven into the voice of humanity itself, and whispered with fear in the voices of their rivals. The colony where it began grew strong and safe, for predators never returned, their shadows broken by the scars of defeat, and in their absence new life flourished, the forests still wild yet quieter than before, and the fields heavy with food and laughter. The monument of the honey badger stood tall at the edge of the settlement, its carved fangs forever bared against the horizon, and every visitor bowed before it, whether human or alien, for respect had replaced disbelief. The child grew into an adult, carrying the fire of survival in their eyes, and when they spoke, people listened, for their words carried the weight of lived truth, and they reminded every crowd that courage was not a weapon built in labs, nor a shield forged in factories. It was the will to rise again and again, no matter how many times the world tried to break you. And these words became a creed passed from one colony to another until it reached the farthest edge of human expansion. The honey badger itself aged, yet even in age its fire never dimmed, its body slower, but its spirit still unbroken, still snapping at shadows, still growling at storms. And to the settlers, it became more than guardian, it became ancestor and symbol of the very soul of humanity. And when it finally rested under the stars, for the last time, the entire colony stood in silence, and the galaxy itself seemed to pause for something greater. Then flesh had passed into legend. Its body was buried beneath the monument, and above the stones they carved a single phrase, in a dozen tongues: "Never give up." And travelers from across the stars came to see this place, not as tourists, but as pilgrims seeking to touch the soil where a creature so small had changed the course of empires, and each pilgrim left with the same thought, that humanity was unlike any species they had ever known. In alien capitals, leaders still whispered of it. Some called it foolish to fear a beast long dead. Others said the fear remained not because of the beast, but because of what it revealed about humanity. For if humans could honor such fury in something so small, then what fury lived in their own hearts? And this question haunted every council meeting, every war plan, every alliance discussion, until the very mention of human involvement shifted the balance of decisions. Armies painted the likeness of the honey badger on their banners, fleets carved it into their hulls, children drew it on walls with chalk and sang songs about its battles, and thus the legacy deepened, for no enemy could strike it down, no rival could erase it, and no time could dull it, for it was no longer the story of an animal, it was the story of defiance itself. Generations later, the colony child, now grown into a leader, spoke at great councils where humans and aliens gathered together, and they said that the honey badger taught them the greatest truth of all, that power is not in size or in strength, but in refusal to surrender, and they declared that humanity would carry this truth into every corner of the galaxy, and those who listened felt both fear and awe. Wars broke out in distant regions, wars where humanity had no stake, yet the story of the honey badger was invoked as a reason to avoid drawing humans into the fire, for rulers whispered that if humans fought, they would fight like the beast with rage that never ended, and this thought alone was enough to keep fleets away. Merchants grew rich, selling symbols of the creature forged in gold, carved in wood, burned into steel, and these trinkets were not just goods, they were talismans carried by soldiers and settlers alike as promises that they too would rise again no matter the odds, and thus the legacy became not only story but practice, shaping the very way people lived. Even predators of other worlds began to avoid human territories, sensing something unseen, perhaps sending the fear that lived in their ancestors, for memory runs deep in blood, and beasts too remember the wounds that never healed, and so even nature itself seemed to respect the legend, as if the will of the honey badger echoed in the very soil of human lands. The galaxy itself shifted around the story. Diplomacy bent under its weight. War plans were abandoned before they began, and alliances formed not from love, but from respect and dread, for humanity had proven something no empire could ignore, that they were not the largest, not the strongest, not the oldest, but they carried within them the fury that never broke. The child now leader spoke often of the night. They had been saved. They described the glowing green eyes, the reaching claws, the vines that trapped their boots, and the roar that shook the sky. And each retelling left the listeners trembling, not because of the predator, but because of the unstoppable fury that answered it. And they always ended with the same words: it never gave up, and neither will we. The legacy of fury spread into art, into music, into prayer. Some called the honey badger a saint, some called it a warrior spirit, some called it the first true soldier of humanity. And though names changed, the meaning remained the same: never surrender, never bow, never die quietly, for even the smallest voice can echo through the stars. In time, the colony itself became a place of pilgrimage. Fleets stopped to lay offerings at the monument. Leaders came to kneel in silence before the carved fangs, and children dreamed of growing into warriors who would carry the same fire into their own battles. And the monument shone brighter than gold, for it held not wealth, but memory. And so the galaxy trembled, not from fleets nor from fire, but from a legacy that no enemy could erase, for humanity had written its name in fury, and in blood, and in will. And the honey badger, though gone in flesh, lived forever in spirit, reminding all who looked upon its image that true power comes not from claws or teeth or weapons, but from the refusal to surrender. The stars themselves seemed to carry the message. Now every council, every warlord, every emperor knew the truth, that if humanity was pressed, if humanity was cornered, if humanity was threatened, then the galaxy would see again the fury that began with a single small beast on a forgotten world, and in that fury nothing could stand. Thus the legacy of fury was sealed, not a story, not a symbol, but as destiny, and the galaxy knew it would echo forever. For legends may fade, but truths carved in courage never die, and this was the truth that shook the galaxy: humanity never gives up,